Louisiana versus all y'all. Jared Rosa here with Sam Spiegelman, former coworker at NOLA.com, Tom Spicune, coworker again with Rivals, where he's now regional analyst, still covering a lot of Louisiana guys as well as Texas, and now dipping into Mississippi as well. Sam, it's been a weird offseason to say the least, a weird week as we're now both preparing to go to some Wednesday night high school football games. But how's everything been treating you down the road?
I guess I can't complain, right? We've been able to go to games and see football, and we're safe. The kids are safe, and that's probably the most important part. So I'm just happy that we're having these opportunities.
I want to get into, I mentioned some of our career background. I want to get into kind of what your role is now and kind of your path to here. But starting point with some of these games that we do have on a Wednesday night, some premier programs, particularly ones in our areas in Southeast Louisiana, on the docket. You're getting ready to hit the road and go to Lafayette, where a very quickly rescheduled STM versus Walker on a Wednesday instead of STM versus Rummel on a Friday is happening. And I'll be at Karr Catholic, which you just saw Karr and Easton a few days ago. As you saw some of these matchups come into play for week two, what stands out? I guess starting with yours, there's going to be an awful lot of points in Lafayette tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I watched the first huddle from Walker Howard, obviously Rivals 250 for 2022. That was his first start, right? And it says a lot to have a kid based on camp performances to be ranked as, a top 5, 6. I'm not sure where Walker's ranked, but we know he's one of the best because we've seen him throw so many times without starting a game, and he takes over for Caleb Holstein, and he has so much arm talent. And I think he threw or accounted for 5 total touchdowns, but Walker is listed as a pro style. He's making plays with his legs. He's throwing across the field, making Aaron Rodgers-like throws. And that's honestly the comparison that came to mind when watching his huddle. Obviously, he is blessed to have a receiver like Jack Bech. We have him ranked as a 4-star tight end because he's a big-bodied flex slot receiver, tight end, whatever he is fantastic. He throws everything thrown to him. I would not be surprised if he led this game in receiving, and that is a big statement because Brian Thomas is on the other side. And you and I were at Walker a little bit earlier this offseason. It's very unusual offseason, and Brian Thomas is that dude. He is one of the best in the country, no matter who is his quarterback, no matter what offense he's in. And I'm not sure if there's a St. Thomas more DB that's going to be able to cover him. I'd expect to see 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 on him. But this is my first time seeing Brian live, not against Zachary, and I'll still see him against Zachary later this year. But I'll never miss that game as long as Hilton and Brian are playing. But it's just another way to look at these guys, and after a big offseason where we haven't really been around too much.
Yeah, Brian, for all of his talent at wide receiver, they've kind of had some ups and downs at quarterback year to year and game to game in recent years. And I saw them early last season against Destrehan when they went into a season, and I don't think it was one of their stronger, quarterback years. And next thing I know, he's back involved in the secondary. He's returning kicks. He threw a touchdown to Aubrey Womack. And so he's going to do some things regardless of what else is going on around him. And so it'll be a lot of fun to watch him. And you mentioned Chris Hilton, too, and another guy that we're going to talk some about with this Karr game, Destyn, now Hill, 3 of the top wide receivers in the state. Those 3 are kind of the 3 that stand out to me, maybe a little bit ahead of even a Jack or a Malik Neighbors who is out in Lafayette. When you watch those guys and then the bigger, deeper cast of wide receivers for this 2021 class as a whole in Louisiana, what stands out? What kind of separates that small group, and how deep is this crew coming out of the boot right now?
Man, I think you're right. Those 3 are a notch above the rest. But it is a really deep, and you can't go there. I think it's tough to have this conversation after a weird offseason, because if you were to ask me back in February or March, I remember going to Booker T to kind of talk a little bit to Tyrese, who was getting ready for a basketball season. Tyrese Johnson from Booker T, Washington. Keon Coleman, who just decommitted from Kansas, I believe, last night. Jack, who we moved to tight end so we can make him a 4-star, because obviously he lacks kind of that elite top end speed. But it's Malik, who picked up an LSU offer from his home state on the day that LSU lost to Mississippi State in Baton Rouge. Talk about atypical circumstances, but he's the crown jewel of Mississippi State's 2021 recruiting class. And there are the list goes on deep and deep, but Brian and Chris, I remember at the beginning of kind of setting up the rankings for this 2021 class, I went back and forth daily. I can't tell you how many times I watched their sophomore tapes back to back and kind of left saying you can't go wrong picking either one of these guys to be the number one prospect in the state. Obviously now, I believe Chris is third and Brian might be fourth. So Mason and Sage, congrats to you guys for kind of stepping up above them in the state rankings. But receiver-wise, they're just so different. So it kind of depends on what you like in a receiver. Hilton is that guy going into the season. He made an absurd catch last week in Zachary's opener. I didn't really see what Brian did. I'm sure he did something unusually fantastic off the top of my head. And I did get to see Destyn, who maybe, he doesn't get the targets that maybe Aaron Anderson, because they spread the wealth around at Karr, that. But when Destyn got open, he made a huge contested catch in the middle of the field. He was a red zone guy. And Destyn was the best guy I saw at the Rivals camp, which was March 9th, right before quarantine kind of got underway. So to me, yeah, those guys, they're all differing skill sets, and they all have a case to be the number one receiver in the state. And without question, I think all are ranked within the top 150 nationally, which just says a lot about the top end of the wide receivers in Louisiana. And then it is a deep class. Tyrese could certainly put his name amongst them by the end of this season. Malik, if eligible, could obviously do the same. Keon, I'm so anxious to see what Keon does as a senior. We know how good of a basketball player he is, and he really showed a lot last year as a junior. But my takeaway is that Louisiana has some fantastic skill position players, and they are very deep in that regard.
Yeah, Tyrese is a guy that I know a lot of Power 5 colleges, and obviously he's committed to Arizona right now, but a lot of Power 5 colleges love his game and are eager to see him his senior year. Keon, I mentioned on radio this morning, is one of the more interesting and intriguing prospects to me, because I think from a raw talent and athleticism standpoint, he's among the top couple of guys in this class statewide. And then when you throw the basketball into the mix and figure out how he's kind of weighing all of this, it's a lot of different variables. You mentioned Jack a couple of times with the kind of versatile, hybrid tight end type role, which I'm interested to see with him as he's bulked up a lot this offseason. I think that's a really interesting possibility for him, whether it be at Vandy or if one of these other bigger SEC schools makes a move on him. With coming back to Walker a little bit, we mentioned some of the things we're looking for from these receivers their senior years. For Walker, with as hyped as he has been, now to actually be the guy, what are some of the things that you most want to see from him, whether to confirm some of that hype over the course of a varsity season, or to maybe even kind of take it to that next level and see him to continue to progress?
Well, I think that Walker High School I think that's the best defense that he's going to face. Definitely in the early part of the season. I don't know what STM's full schedule is, but a Chad Mahaffey coach defense, I expect them to find ways to kind of put pressure on him, coverages where he has to make the right read. What I saw last week, unbelievable arm talent, mobility, making these he has a deep ball. He can launch it 60, 70 yards downfield with ease. Arm strength is not a question. That's why he can zip it into Jack. I think what I'm interested is maybe seeing how he throws to players that aren't Jack Bech. I know he's certainly capable of it. Jack is kind of a cheat code. He has really excelled with these contested balls, and Walker and him have so much chemistry, like you'd expect from any quarterback, number one receiver type. But I think what I just kind of want to see how Walker does when he faces that pressure, when he has better coverage on Jack, when they're doing a double or triple team. How quickly does he go through his reads and find the open guy, and is he able to do it? And does he resort to his legs, because he's a playmaker? I don't think we're going to rank him as a dual threat unless he really wants to. But he shot down the line on it was a design run and no one was going to stop him, and he looked like a man on a mission. So those are the same kind of traits you see in the 5-star in 2022. Quinn Ewers out of South Lake Carroll, who's obviously our number one quarterback in the country. Walker shares a lot of the same physical traits as him. So going against a better defense, I'll be fortunate to see how Walker responds. I'm pretty sure he's going to be up to the task based on what I saw last week, but you never know. But I think it's like he's been ready for this, and I'm sure he's gotten plenty of pep talks from his coaches and obviously his dad, who played at LSU. I think he's been waiting for this moment for so long, and he is, I remember kind of seeing him as an underclassman at LSU camps and at Rivals camp, and even in San Antonio in the beginning of the year in January, before we thought that COVID or any of these crazy things would have happened over the last year. But, it's almost like he kind of has to flick the switch on and then he takes over. It looked like he came into this high school football season with the switch on. So I'm just anxious to see where he takes it because he's handling everything super well. And I'm sure you noticed that from seeing what he did last week kind of seamlessly, saw the same kind of things.
Yeah, he didn't look like he was shying away from anything at the varsity level as much as everyone was eager to see how he handled that big start to start his junior year. It just kind of looked like that's what he does. That's what he was born.
It's a day in the office.
Yeah, exactly. Another guy that you just saw this past weekend that I'll see tonight, A.J. Samuel. I told you, Coy Moore's brother, Corey, was saying A.J. Samuel needs to be talked about in the same breath as Arch Manning, who obviously – partially because that Manning name carries so much weight, but partially because Arch is an elite level quarterback in his class for 2023. What's kind of your reaction of some of the early glimpses of AJ, who's another talented young quarterback in Louisiana, obviously coming along in his own right?
Yeah, I've been anxious to see AJ. The Karr staff has talked him up over the last year, even when when AJ was just the backup and the quarterback in waiting, they were still really high on him. And in talking to members of the staff, they're still extremely high on him, as they should. He was fantastic last week going against Warren Easton. And Warren Easton's defense, they're going to be better, I think, as the year goes on. I think they had a kind of some rust to shake off, going against Karr, and Karr's had their number for a couple of years. But AJ, without any pressure from the Warren Easton defensive front seven, and that's the case, he kind of toyed with Warren Easton's defense. He waited for his receivers to get open. If no one was getting open, he busted a run. He's certainly a dual threat, and he can make plays with his legs. When he has time, he filters through. He sees the progressions. He can throw it deep. He can laser it in short. I thought he made some really good throws. With that being said, I expect Catholic to I know that Catholic was in the building at West Jeff last weekend. And they were probably saying, why isn't there any pressure on this kid? You can't let an accurate passer with arm talent sit there and navigate the field. He's going to rip you apart, especially with Karr's receivers. I mean, Destin Hill and Aaron Anderson are both two of the best in their respective classes, and they got young guys like Racy McMath's little brother and another Simmons. I mean, these are names that you've heard, McMath and Simmons, and now Hill and Anderson over and over in Algiers for years. And Warren Easton's linebacker, Drea Johnson, was up to the task, and their defense, their secondary played out of their minds. And they picked off AJ on the first throw of his high school career as a starter, right? Which says a lot. But I think AJ, I don't think he's in the same caliber at the moment as an Arch Manning. I think Arch, we're talking about a generational type talent. That's not just because of his last name. It has a lot to do with it. But Arch, the first time I saw him was, again, making plays with his arms and his legs. He's way more mobile. He reminds me so much more of Archie than he does of Peyton or Eli. And Arch has that same kind of unbelievable arm talent when you talk about a Quinn Ewers or a Walker Howard. AJ, I think, has good arm talent. I don't think he's throwing it 70 yards on a rope, but he's certainly capable of leading this Karr offense right back to the Superdome if that's where they're headed. I also think that it's easier for him to do it without a pass rush. And he's in a system where these receivers are going to get open. I think that needs to be taken into the equation. I'm not calling him a system quarterback, but the system is beneficial to him. I think before we start putting him in that same conversation as our buddy Corey wants to put him in, I think, I think one person said, maybe Tulane, maybe Memphis, but, definitely an in-state school is going to take a shot on him. He's got those natural innate abilities, and he's going to get better. He's only a sophomore. So no one needs to make a declarative statement on him after his first ever start at Karr. I think you're going to have some takeaways after seeing him live in person on his second start. And as I would say with any kid, if you're trying to evaluate them, one game isn't enough body of work. You want to see the full body after a full season. So a long way to go, but encouraging start. Let's not put him in the Arch Manning category just yet, though.
And any Manning elder that you want to compare Arch to, you can't go wrong if you're Arch. If you want to compare him to Uncle Eli, Uncle Peyton, Grandpa, it doesn't matter. It's all going to work out well for him. And he was on so many radars so early because of that name, but has just been so excellent with every opportunity, and goes out there last week and is connecting with AJ and Kai and those guys and looking phenomenal. So I am interested to see AJ now for the first time tonight. It's going to be interesting to see what Christian Mannino, Wesley Woodward, and some of those guys for that Catholic defense can do up front, as well as Michael Cerniauskas and Josh Robertson, Connor Stewart, and all those guys in the secondary. But some of the lead names for Catholic end up being on the other side of the ball, a guy in Emery Jones that you're obviously super familiar with, has a lot of SEC offers, including hometown LSU. And then we were both there when Shelton Sampson blazes his 40 time and immediately starts pulling in his own SEC offers. So it'll be some good matchups, I guess, both sides of the ball tonight between Karr and Catholic.
Yeah, Emery, listen, when we were at Catholic a little bit earlier this year, hearing Coach Fertitta talk about just Emery's basketball background, obviously he's got enormous size. You pair that with the athleticism of being on the basketball court. I think he plays tackle for Catholic. I wouldn't be surprised if they were a little bit more liberal with him, moving him around, the offensive front, because you have Tygee Hill, a Rivals 250 defensive tackle at Karr, and he was really disruptive last week. He was really athletic, making plays not only in the trenches, but getting out in space down the line of scrimmage. That Gabe is going to run the ball a ton against Karr, which wouldn't be a terrible strategy whatsoever. And then for Sampson, I mean, I don't know if he's not the fastest receiver in the state already. I mean, Destin Hill they have two of the fast. You have 1 and 1A on the same field. So, but Karr had some really young, talented DBs, and I made Rivals profiles for both of those guys over the weekend. They were phenomenal because one of them helped negate Casey Kane for a half that he was healthy, and that Alred Luke is one of the fastest, again, one of the more playmaking gadget kind of players in the whole state, and he was kind of held in check until the fourth quarter. And then Destin Refuge in the nickel is I'd be interested to see if they'd maybe double team him or keep Destyn in the short field with him. Destyn is the most underrated player right now after 1 week of Louisiana high school football for me. I'm sure I'll have a different opinion after this weekend, but I don't know if Destyn even has an offer yet, but that dude had the pick six in the state championships against Easton, and he was phenomenal defending the run, making plays from a nickel safety spot. I would love to see an in-state offer from him, whether it's Tulane or McNeese or UL. Like, he can play. He's just unfortunately blessed with the kind of size that I was given at 5'11", which obviously is a hindrance. But, man, when you can play, and you can find a certain level where he would compete at. But I'm really interested to see which one of these receivers kind of breaks out, if not both. And then, obviously, the Tygee-Emery matchup is really one to key in on.
Yeah, I just tried to I pulled up my list really quick. Destyn is still waiting on his first offer, and I think if we're talking about 5'11", he'd be thankful for 5'11", because he's a little bit shy of that.
One of the few I look almost eye to eye or a little bit down. It's very few, very infrequent that happens.
I asked you, I guess, about what you are looking to see from a Walker Howard to kind of confirm where he's at ranking wise. And we've talked about what has gone into evaluation of a lot of these guys in different ways and at different points of their career. that's a big part of what you do now in your regional analyst role is, I mean, bringing your rankings for the states together and meeting with the other regional analysts and putting together the big national rankings. What does that process look like for you? Because me, just for the first time going through an extensive Louisiana rankings, that's insanely time consuming. You're watching these guys film over and over and over again, back to back, like you mentioned with Brian and Chris. You obviously have seen a lot of them, but trying to get a fuller picture because you can only be at one game at a time, sort of thing. What is that task for you? What's kind of the mindset you take into it each year?
I'm glad you gave it great context, because it's not easy, and you're trying to go about things objectively, and fairly, obviously, and accurately. The goal is to be accurate, and that's the bottom line, is to try to come as close to the NFL draft when these guys hear their names called as possible. Leonard Fournette's are easy to rank, right? Because you know what happens the second they take the field. It's easy to be that dude. I think what goes into, I mean, we'll see how my evaluations go for this class, but I think the more you see a kid, it's easier. So, whether it's like, trying to be at a Terrebonne game each spring or each year, and then seeing a camp setting, it gives you the most knowledge to make an informed evaluation. And if I'm struggling, I try to go back into a huddle and, I try to look at some of their games against their best opponents. In Louisiana, it's a little bit easier. In Texas, it's a little bit easier. It'll be a little bit more difficult with the Mississippi and Arkansas and Oklahoma guys, because I don't know those teams as well. But yeah, it's a grueling process. I would say for about 2 or 3 weeks every November, like around Thanksgiving, Christmas time, I kind of lock myself in a room, and I have every monitor full with tape, and I try to look at the same criteria that, a Mel Kiper or a Todd McShay or a Daniel Jeremiah or a Bucky Brooks would look at when you're trying to figure out who is going to get drafted. Do they have all these requisite traits? Is it going to be someone like a Donovan Kaufman, who was a Rivals 4-star, right? A Rivals ranked 250, not as respected by other sites, and the same goes for some of the guys that they're more familiar with, whereas we're a little bit closer to Donovan by our circumstance. I think the more you see a kid, the more confident you feel. And I think confidence is key, because if I'm going to come on a show with you and explain why I made, JoJo Earl a 5-star receiver, I need to have the justification. I need to have track times. I need to have height and weight verified. I need to see what he did in his most important games. The fact that he's been in state championships, I think the last 3 years, and maybe a 4th this year if Alito is good enough. How did he perform in those big games? How did he perform in those big playoff games? We talk about Puka Magic. Looking back, Puka, he wasn't my rating, but I probably would have flirted with making Puka a 5-star if I would have been in charge of the rankings. And I think about that kind of stuff all the time, about the players that maybe I was higher on than others. And then you have to look at the most important thing, film. I get people DMing me all the time, look at this. He's 6'7" and 280 pounds, and he runs a 4.3 40. Well, he sounds great, but can he play football? And I know that those other things are really important. They're critical, knowing your 5'10" 5 shuttle, or, if I know that he can jump 40 inches like A.J. Johnson for Newman, that helps me, because I know he's going to win a lot of contested balls. He's got great hands, and I know he can jump through the gym. The issue is can you play football? And I think, you address 2020 with that. There's like 3 or 4 different types of wide receivers. You have a basketball team full of wide receivers. You have a secondary that has outside corners, boundary corners, nickel corners, free safeties, Jamal Adams safeties, strong safeties, outside linebacker safeties, Aaron Brule safeties. Everyone can play. I don't even think positions even matter anymore. You're just looking at the athlete. So I think it's a combination of what's important to your evaluation, whether it's height or speed or both of those. It's, can they play football? Can they play at a high level? Do they step up in big games? Do they play at a meet or Dunham? Are you an Ishmael Sopsher, Devontae Lee, a Derek Stingley Jr.? You better be the best player on the field if you play at that low level. Who do you play, and then how do you do in those big games? And then honestly, I love to talk to coaches about it, because coaches, Yeah, in March and April and May, they're trying to get their kids recruited. But, when they're in the state championships or, in the playoffs or the end of their regular season, they're a little bit more honest with their assessments, and they've seen a lot of kids to compare and contrast because we can only be at one game at a time. And that's the unfortunate thing with 2020 is not COVID. It's that we are only able to be at one game at a time because I'd love to be at 2 games tonight. I'd love to be at 3 if I could really get to Hanville too. And see what Mason does against a really talented Hanville offense. The issue is just being confident in your evaluations, and that's just putting the time in. And hopefully more than right, we're gonna mess up time to time. It's difficult, but it's fun, and and you can be higher on other people as long as you can explain yourself. I think it's not that serious of a job. I mean, I know we're trying to be as accurate as possible, but you got to take it with a grain of salt and enjoy that we're watching football players and ranking them for a living and doing our best to assess their futures. And I think that, when you have allies like yourself and James, if he ever picks up his phone and looks at this, and Julie, of course, and some of my best friends that we talk about this every day, and sharing that information helps us all when we put our rankings in.
And you mentioned we're going to miss, it's such an inexact science. You see it with the coaches, the college coaches recruiting. There are hits and misses, and a lot goes into it from a purely athletic standpoint, but also you talk about having those opportunities to chat with the high school coaches and to hear more about these guys, maybe what you're not seeing on film. As you're projecting, particularly as you talk about the fact that you're considering which of these guys are maybe NFL guys down the road and things of that nature, how much do you factor in things like their mentality, work ethic type stuff, as well as sometimes the voices and influences that they may have around them, and knowing that people are kind of pulling them in some weird and sometimes wrong directions?
It's a huge part. And I think those are some of the differences, the catalyst between a 3 and a 4 star and a 4 and a 5 star. We've both been around kids with all the talent in the world, but maybe the motor isn't there. I mean, if you were an NFL GM and you were looking at, I don't want to use Chris and Brian as examples because they're both excellent kids, but let's say Joe Schmo and Earl Mitchell, and both one's a great yards after catch receiver, and the other is, the best at getting contested balls in the country. But, Joe Schmo, he's not working 4 days a week. He's not working out. He's not showing up to practice. He's missed a playoff game. Those are red flags, and you have to take that into consideration like you would if you were going to pay him millions of dollars one day on your NFL team. There are kids. That's why, you get these discrepancies in rankings where other sites may have more information or less information, and they could rank someone as a 4 star, and we have more information or less information, and we rank him as a high 3 star, and that's the difference. If someone has a bad work ethic or there's some off the field issues, that has to be taken into consideration. You can have all the skill in the world, but if you don't show up on, I guess, whether it's Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays, or Sundays, it's an issue. So I think it's all a part of the equation. And when you meet good kids like a Derek Stingley, like a Chris Hilton, like a Cedric Van Pran, it's really easy to root for them and take that into the evaluation because at least they're going to go in with a blue collar mentality and kind of put the work in to get better. So those do make you feel a little bit more comfortable when you put big grades on kids.
You had to get a big burger love in there.
I had to. I was just texting him the other day.
For you to where you are now, I told you I wanted to reference some of your journey. What's a dude from up in the Northeast, New York, Maryland, and just your background doing down here, NOLA.com, SEC country, rivals covering the South Central region. And as you kind of look at sort of the ups and downs along the way, what is it like to reflect on that process of where you are now?
Yeah, well, because I have a lot of long, tedious drives already and plenty to look forward to, including today. If you would have told me I was going to be at Rivals ranking players when I was at Maryland, I played high school football, and I think we had one player get recruited to Delaware, and it was like half on a lacrosse scholarship. So, and the other person made their own highlight tape and went to play like Division III at Assumption College, where LSU's old kicker went. I've been there. I went to watch him. He did terrible in that game. Not the kicker, my buddy. He was terrible.
Okay.
He was terrible in high school. I don't even know how he got recruited.
I was about to say Cole Tracy's coming for you, except for Cole's such a nice guy, he would have never come.
He would never. I've written so nicely about him during my time on the LSU beat. It's just funny. I thought I'd be covering the New York Jets right out of college. It turns out that was not in the cards for me. And while I was a senior, I covered my first high school game in the DC area. And I loved it. I thought I was going to be mad, and I wanted to go out on a Friday night and do college kid things. But I went to a high school game in the suburbs of Maryland, DC, and I had a great time. And I loved the idea of like cranking out this story on a deadline that like my editor had given me. And then, when you factor in things like that we have in 2020 with photo and video, it makes it a lot more interactive. And those are things that I like to add to my job now that has fun with it. But long story short, because I know that, no one really cares too much, but I did start to really like high school, and it's way easier to get a job covering high school sports out of college than it is covering the New York Jets. So I took my talents to Ocean City, Maryland after college. They didn't even have a sports job opening, but I convinced them to let me cover games on Friday nights. I remember getting lost in the woods on my way home. I remember people not even wanting to do interviews with me because they'd never been interviewed before. And I was like, no, it won't be in the paper, but it'll be online. They didn't understand what I was even saying. But Indian River football did get covered in Shelbyville, Delaware. And then I used that. I had a great meeting with Marcus Carmouche. He'll probably deny it to this day because he still can't stand me. But I convinced him. I came from Mardi Gras, where I met my now wife. And we met at the Starbucks at Canal Place. And I basically said, listen, I'm a good reporter. I know you all need some help. You have this great high school network that y'all started, headed by Jarrett Roser, has nothing to do with Amos Morale or Jimmy Smith. And he was like, listen, we have no openings. And then a month later, he called me and said, get in the car and drive to New Orleans. And I left that Friday. And I don't regret it ever. I never regret coming to New Orleans. I don't think I could compare my love of high school football to yours. That would be an unfair comparison. But I truly love it. I think, NOLA.com and then layoffs there. SEC country, I was able to get enough money to buy a diamond ring and buy a house in New Orleans. And that's centered around just a love for what we do. Is we follow these kids that emerge into superstars, and they have personalities and they have incredible stories, especially when they come from New Orleans, but kids all over the region. And what my job now as a regional analyst after many years as the high school and LSU beat, it just gives you, listen, I love the LSU beat because I did love the access and everything and everything that went to a college beat reporter job. But when you get to cover kids, you get to know their moms and dads and their coaches and their brothers and sisters. You really get to know them, which is why texting someone like Coy Moore or Cedric Van Pran after their first college games is riveting. And that's the enjoyment I get. And when you're watching on Saturdays and Sundays and you say, oh, Dante just had a pick for the Panthers, or I can't believe, that, so-and-so, that they're talking about Jamar Chase as the number one receiver in the draft. And I remember him walking out of LSU camp so mad that Les Miles put him at safety. And his dad, Jimmy Chase, coming up and saying, don't worry, guys, I got this. Those are the stories that I live for, and that's what makes my job great. The analyst role is not anything I ever thought about. I'm happy to do it. I love it. There's a lot of different roles that you can have fun with, and I try to make it my own. But my favorite thing of leaving the LSU beat was to be able to cover kids like Jack Bech, who's going to Vanderbilt, and, you would think, or someone like Quinn Ewers, who's going to go to Texas. And it expanded the amount of kids and parents and moms and dads and coaches that I get to talk to on a daily basis. And that's what makes this job great. And I wouldn't trade this job for any job in the country, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah. Look, man, you got the girl, you got New Orleans. I think probably, working with the Jamars and Jimmys and all the Louisiana high school kids and families might be more fun than the Jets right now.
I feel like I really lucked out. I lucked into this, and I'm so happy. Unless Eric Bieniemy comes and they draft Jamar with the first overall pick, they give Sam Darnold a weapon, or maybe they stink again and they draft little Sting in a couple of years. Unless that happens, I feel like I'm the winner in all this. I wouldn't want to cover the Jets, even if they doubled my salary. I think
If they end up with Jamar or Sting, you might have to play the reverse role and hop in a car on a Friday and drive back north and hopefully not get lost in the woods again.
Yeah, no promises. Listen, I'm good with directions, but getting there takes me a while, man. I count on getting lost every time I get in the car. That's with GPS.
Well, I'm going to let you go get on the road to Lafayette because I know you're getting close to being on a tight schedule for that one to go catch that STM and Walker game. But I definitely appreciate you visiting for a little while here this afternoon, and hopefully we get a chance to do it again sometime similarly.
Of course, man. Louisiana versus all y'all. For anything.
There you go. He's Sam Spiegelman, regional analyst for Rivals, and for Louisiana versus all y'all, Jared Roser.